is this? I don't know. It's me. It's Amid the Ruins. It's a guy who makes Dyer wave music. It's Amid the Ruins. Dyer wave music. What I've talked about in, probably 100 articles at Jay's Analysis is the implementation of the AI smart grid and the giant smart cities, which is what IBM talks about publicly building. And that's where we're going, and that's what I think we have to be really concerned about. So all of these tensions, they are part of a long-term strategy to basically get everybody moved into mega cities. They'll be forced off of land and so forth for environmental reasons, and basically concocted and invented environmental nonsense. Then you'll be stuck in some hellhole mega city in a, basically a carton-sized apartment living over a Target or something, or inside of a Target or a Walmart, as I said several years ago. It's actually coming true now. There's actually Target cities. This is all part of the long-term globalist strategy. So, but to get there, you've got to have the constant clash, the constant alchemical blending and mixing and smashing together right out of Manichaeanism to produce the convergence, to produce the synthesis. And that's what's crucial in all this, and what is absolutely true from an alchemical, esoteric, philosophical, and geopolitical perspective, the fact the ruling elite seek to be post-human. jaysanalysis.com. fix today's problems politically. And this is what so many people in alt circles and alt-right and alt-whatever and alt-media, they all seem to think that there's like a political solution to man's problems. And really the whole of modernity is built on this neo-pagan concept of political salvation. And there is no political salvation for man, because man's problems are not essentially political. They're spiritual.
Forget about it. 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 Forget. You want to forget about it? Anyway, I haven't forgot about it. I remember it. And your favorite nerd is here to do your homework for you. I even got my tracksuit on. I even got a little bit of tracksuit on right here. We're gonna be talking about, you got it, the Mafia, the five families, the history of organized crime, and their relationship to intelligence agencies in Hollywood. This has been a long time coming. As you know, we started off a few years ago doing the Global Elites book series, and I intend this to be an addendum section of that series, because even though the Sicilian Mafia, the Cosa Nostra, does not run the world, every time I talk about this, people feel the need to correct me about geopolitics and tell me who runs the world. I already know geopolitics very well. Been studying this field for, 13, 15 years. And so we're going to be looking at the power circles, the power blocks, in terms of zooming in on the U.S. We're not going to be talking about all of the mafias in the world. That's a lot way beyond the scope of what we're going to be talking about in this series. But I want this to be comparable to the Tragedy and Hope series, right? So we did, of course, the 1,300-page work by Dr. Quigley that was so important in dissecting and understanding how the world really works in terms of the Anglo-American power block. And, of course, that was written in the 60s. It was a book written, as we've seen, for high-level people, policymakers, CIA section chiefs in the 70s and so forth. And what I want this to be is something comparable to that, because I'm at least, 3 weeks deep into research into the to organized crime in the U.S. and their history, the structure, the meaning, the oaths, the origins. And it's a fascinating field. As I said, when I was in high school, the first paper that I ever wrote for English class was on Al Capone, because the teacher said, I want you to write a paper on something that you enjoy. That was literally how she talked. And I went under a fake name in that class. I don't even know why. She just one day said, what's your name? And I said, Mark Stevenson. And she said, well, I'll call you Mark if that's what you want. And for the rest of the year, she called me Mark Stevenson. And I think she thought that there was some real, meaningful significance, or that I was like asserting myself and I wanted to define my identity. And really, I was just clowning around. Like we would always write Tony Danza, right? My friend and I, Ben, and I would write our names on our papers as Tony Danza. And people always looked for some kind of significance to this. And what does this mean? It literally means nothing. It's just absurdity. And we loved the absurdity. And we kind of enjoyed the teachers going on their concern. There were parent PTO meetings where they tried to, I'm not joking, decode the stuff that we talked about. And really we were just trolling them. Like we would write the names of metal bands in chalk, by the way, not in marker, on chalkboards. And for example, we would write Cannibal Corpse on the chalkboard, and we draw skulls and bones. And we had to go to the guidance counselor because they thought that we were literally Cannibal Corpse fans, that we were into satanic metal, and really we were just trolling the school. And I think I even said something like, "Well, don't you think if we were gonna graffiti, we would graffiti in something a little more permanent than chalk, which you can easily just erase?" But no, the guidance counselors were very concerned about our well-being. But we was just trolling, y'all. We was the OG trolls, right? Anyway, how did I get to that? Anyway, so high school, that was fun. That was fun. But all of that just to say that, you know, when you're in high school and somebody says, I want you to write a paper, and you have to write on something that you at least find interesting, because who in, you know, high school wants to write a paper, dude? Ugh, gross. Get that out of here. I thought, well, I like Mafia movies. I'll write a paper on Al Capone. So I learned about Al Capone. Half of it I don't remember. I was, you know, 9th grade or whatever. So that piqued my interest in the Mafia. And of course, as a fan of Hollywood, I've always had a fascination for Mafia movies. Right? People always say, "What's your favorite? What's your favorite movie? What's the best movie?" Well, I guess The Godfather is the best trilogy overall, right? And people said, why? Why is The Godfather so good? Well, because it hits on all the cylinders, right? It is a great story. It relates to the real world. It relates to, you know, power moves, power struggles, making money, coming up in this world. It relates to America, Americanism, the idea of America, the American dream, America versus traditional cultures, international criminal conspiracies. Right, obviously, right. So remember that people still think that this doesn't exist. There's no such thing as international criminal conspiracies, even though it's a crime you can be convicted of. Somehow it doesn't exist.
Well, it's not that it doesn't exist, it's that it doesn't exist on a global scale. And so that's just a theory to say that there's international rackets of conspiracy.
Okay, really? Well, we're going to see, as is, again, just like with Tragedy and Hope, the purpose of this talk will be to illustrate how the world really works. And how the world really works cannot be understood apart from intelligence agencies and criminal rackets. Out of rackets, see? How can you understand the world without understanding the black markets, which are a gigantic portion of the global economy? Duh, did you even know that? Have you read Crossing the Rubicon, Skeptic? No, you haven't. I did, and a gigantic portion of that 1,000-page book is about how the global economy is propped up by a lot of fraud, right? Derivatives, the derivatives bubble, right? It's going to pop, to quote Webster Tarpley. The Wall Street rackets, right? Wall Street has always been directly tied into the CIA, the intelligence operations. And again, this is just another angle. And, you know, I'm not a JFK aficionado. I don't know a lot about the whole JFK thing. I've heard many conspiracies. I've got some books on JFK. I've read some books. But we're going to see there is a very important mafia angle to the JFK event, which has surfaced in the midst of my research into the 5 families of the mafia. Now, I'm not saying that the mafia necessarily did it. I think there was a confluence of interests that clearly point the finger in certain directions. And then, of course, how high level and how and what motivations went into the JFK, that's another question. So this whole series is not going to be about JFK, although it will overlap with some of the JFK research. So we're going to be looking at the different outfits. The Chicago outfit. We'll be looking at different cities and locations. I just went to Hot Springs. Hot Springs is the Vegas of the South, if you didn't know that, right? Because they have baths, hot baths, which I've been in. Go sit in those hot baths. It's pretty awesome. Although since COVID, I don't think you can really, I guess you can still go, but it sounds like it would be a nightmare. But the mobsters would meet in Hot Springs because it was a declared neutral zone. And it was a declared neutral zone because of the figure Oni Madden, who was a British gangster who came over from the UK and helped organize and set up some of the rackets and organizations back in, I think, the 30s and 40s. And if you've seen the Cotton Club, which we just watched, was pretty good. You'll know that Bob Hoskins is playing Oni Madden. in that film. And so a lot of different ethnicities are going to play into this, right? We're going to see a relationship between UK and the Mafia in the US. There will be Jewish mobsters that figure prominently. There will be, obviously, the Sicilian Cosa Nostra figuring prominently. And then there's going to be some interesting tie-ins to kind of the outlying other gangs, Irish Mafia, this kind of stuff. So there are really fascinating stories to be told here. And, you know, what we're going to be trying to do is do a historical analysis as best we can. I'm not particularly relying on any, I have many books that will verge over into the so-called conspiracy realm, but this will fit into the Tragedy and Hope style lectures because we're not verging into any conspiracy territory. We will be doing normie takes, but the normie takes, the public takes, are going to demonstrate what we talk about. And that's what's going to be really key here. And as you know, yes, we'll be working with multiple texts, one of which is the very well-known bestseller, Selwyn Robb's book, The Five Families. We'll be looking at Murder, Inc. concerning Albert Anastasia, which is Graham Bell's book. And we'll be looking at Charles Ashman's book, CIA and the Mafia. And I have about 5 or 6 other books on order that will go into this series. But of course, Rob's book is about 800 or 900 pages. So that's going to be a lot of meat and content to get through. A lot of gabagool to get through, right? It's a lot of meat in the sense of a lot of gabagool to get through. Can you get that through to your skull? And then I've also got multiple stacks over there that are going to relate to P2, Operation Gladio, the Vatican, the Pope, right? All of that stuff. So that's going to factor into this as well. So we're going to kick this off by getting into the origins of the Cosa Nostra. And by that we mean that's what they preferred to be called themselves, right? So in terms of the five families in New York, Cosa Nostra is the name that they prefer. And they were linked with other groups in other areas. So for example, in Chicago, if you're familiar with Al Capone, you may have heard of him. The Chicago gangsters were known as the Outfit. And then other areas like Buffalo was called the Arm or the Office. I don't remember. It's in my notes. And then another area was known as the Office. So kind of these different regions had these different names. And again, as I was pointing out, Hot Springs, Arkansas, of all places, was a kind of retreat. So it was kind of like a neutral ground where you could go and the local officials were bought off and it was safe territory. So nobody was going to get hit, or there was not going to be any kind of like, dangerous hit situation going on if you went to Hot Springs. And that's why Hot Springs was such a interesting local southern-based hotspot. And that was set up by Oni Madden, who made that into a neutral territory. And but by the way, yes, so why the baths? Well, you can't wear a wire into the baths, right? Unless you got a wire up your butt or something. You can't have a gun. You can't have a dagger. Unless you got a dagger stashed up in your armpit. Pull out a little bitty dagger out of your armpit. It's not going to do a lot of damage in the hot baths. So, naturally, baths make for a great meeting place. And the baths are a lot less likely to be surveilled. And also, it partly played into the fact that Al Capone loved to go down to the baths because he had a little bit of that itch down in the privy areas, if you know what I mean. He had a little bit of that syphilis, right? To use a Theo Von, so had a little bit of that syphilis, a little bit of gonorrhea, if you know what I'm talking about. A little bit of syphilis. He had a little dash of that syphilis, a little dose of that gonorrhea down there in the area. So he liked to go down to them baths because he thought that the baths would cure or help his ailing STDs. His ailing frame due to STDs. And I could do a whole show just on Hot Springs because I've learned so much. I've been through the Mafia tour in Hot Springs twice now. I learn new things every time. I've been to Hot Springs 4 or 5 times, right? And so the last time we did the tour last week on the way back from Dallas, the Texas area, they said Kevin Costner is setting up his museum in Hot Springs, the Kevin Costner Museum. It's weird, but then on top of that, he's doing a show for, I don't know, History Channel, A&E or something like that about the history of the Mafia in Hot Springs. So I'm assuming that a lot of the material and content that, I've learned from the Mafia History Tour in Hot Springs will probably play into Kevin Costner's upcoming TV show, but I don't know. They just announced that the other day when we were there. No, Kevin Costner wasn't there. I didn't get to meet Mr. Brooks. I didn't get to dance with the wolves, if you know what I mean. So that's the big preface. Let's get into this. As we said, we're not going to do the whole history of the world's organized criminal rackets. We're going to be focusing on how did the five families originate and how did they come to power in the U.S. And now, I don't exactly know why five, but it just so happened that there happened to be five groups or rackets that came to be the most powerful in New York. And the 1930s, because of the opening up of immigration, allowed for a lot of people to come over. Now, there were already obviously criminal rackets prior to the 1930s. In fact, the origin of the Mafia, the Sicilian Mafia in the U.S., is not New York. Do you know where it is? This was pretty fascinating. I didn't actually know this, but this actually, now that I think about it, it kind of makes sense. It's New Orleans. The original Plymouth Rock for the Mafia was New Orleans. And so they kind of first set up some of their operations there, just kind of small-time stuff. And that kind of makes more sense, though, when we think about, what's that stupid Kevin Spacey movie? Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil, right? Now, I don't think he's a Sicilian mafia guy. But the idea is that, right, he's some kind of weird, corrupt, elitist guy. It's been many years since, and I don't even remember the whole story there, but there was something interesting going on, if I recall, in Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil with these, ritzy New Orleans families, right? These old school, rich New Orleans families. Anyway, this doesn't last because eventually, due to the gigantic economic and potential, I guess you could say, for the East Coast and for New York, originally the power base that started small shifts to New York. And plus, because of Little Italy, right, the having kinfolk and having the people around you, right, that are your people, there were much more numerous in New York, so you can see the logic of why it would shift away from New Orleans. And I mean, have you been to New Orleans? I mean, like, who would want to live there? New Orleans is crazy, dude. So what are the five families? And eventually they will become, this is still the overview before we jump back to the origin of the term mafiosi and their interesting origins. They do not have an origin in criminal rackets, if you didn't know that. They actually have a libertarian patriotic origin. And we will begin to see why that's relevant later on, but probably not what you expect. So the five families, of course, are the Genovese, the Colombo, the Bonanno, the Lucchese or Lucchese, and the Gambino families. And as you delve into this, you will begin to notice that a lot of the mafia movies and stories are really composites. And that becomes more and more obvious the deeper that you study this subject, because, for example, if you were into The Sopranos, which we just did that analysis very recently, Tony is pretty clearly I don't know. I know that I've read a little bit on this, but it's obviously related to the Cavalcante, which is a smaller family connected to the five families. But so the Cavalcante family was in part the basis for Tony, but also if you learn the history of Frank Costello, pretty obvious a lot of what's going on with Frank Costello is pretty much like Tony, right? So Frank Costello is busted by the FBI by them sneaking into his house and suppose they wire his cabinets, right, when he's out, because he's got a mistress and this kind of stuff. And he would have his meetings in the kitchen, and he would sit there and talk about all this stuff while being filmed through his kitchen. So again, that's very close to the story with Tony, right, in the Sopranos, where Tony has his meetings in the basement, and he's walking around in his house robe, and they eventually try to film him by wiring his a lamp, right? The FBI puts a wire in the lamp. So, and then of course, if you look at the house that Frank Costello had built, this gigantic white kind of estate, looks very similar to Tony's house in The Sopranos. So you'll start to notice a lot of parallels. A lot of people are, again, we just watched The Departed, and of course the Jack Nicholson character in that is a version of Whitey Bulger, right? And if you watched Black Mass with Johnny Depp, also Whitey Bulger, right, which is the Irish Mafia that ended up essentially co-opted by the FBI, and the FBI was using Whitey Bulger against the Italians. So anyway, you'll notice that a lot of these stories that we are told or that we get really play into the movies as composites, and the same with The Godfather, right? I mean, Don Vito Genovese, right? The Don Cheech, these kind of things, right? These are obviously playing into these Hollywood portrayals. So let's see what else. In Rob's account, Selwyn Rob's account, he kind of gives an overview of the present day. Obviously, the Sicilian Mafia is not as powerful as they were in the first half of the 20th century. The 50s and 60s kind of reach an apex, a peak of power and monetary holdings. Not to say that I know nowadays, right? So all the information that I'm using here is public. I don't know anyone in the Mafia. I've never had any kind of secret information, so I don't know. I'm just going by what is sort of the public account from these public texts and books and documentaries. So, but in more recent times, Selwyn Rob gives an account of multiple scams that were being run in the New York, I assume he means the New York area, going from memory here, where they were doing things like charging an extra garbage tax for garbage disposal. So remember Tony? Tony is involved in, the waste management, right? So the waste management would include perhaps some small extra tax. And the way this worked is that, right, if you remember in the show, Tony has a bunch of businesses, right? And the way that he would obtain businesses sometimes is that whoever owned that business, he would, they would be in debt to him, right? So Tony might come and help somebody out of debt through a gambling addiction, right? Remember in The Sopranos, it's the Robert Patrick, right? The Terminator character has a gambling addiction, and eventually this allows Tony to take over his sporting goods business, right? And then Tony has also a strip club, bada bing. He's also got something that he does with stealing cars. It's not exactly clear, but they somehow steal cars and then they ship them and sell them in Italy. So he's got his car racket. And basically the only point I'm just saying is that some of the stories that Selwyn Rob gives about some of these scams for current day organized crime rackets are not that exorbitant. In other words, they're kind of like smaller type of stuff, like construction scams, or a lot of scams, basically. There would be presumably also money to be made in controlling ports, controlling museums. To what degree the mob still controls ports or any of that kind of stuff, I have no idea. But I'm sure that there's different kinds of rackets involved in all those kinds of things. But those are the kinds of rackets. I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, but if you've listened to a lot of Mike Franzese's videos He talks about that he's that former Mafia guy on YouTube. I've listened to tons and tons of his content as well. He talks about gas scams. It's something to do with how they figured out that they could charge, I don't know how much, $5-10 more for gas, or not 5 or 10 cents more for gas. And then over time, they could rack up huge profits, and the fines that they would get when they get caught were small, so they didn't even care about the fines. And somehow, he says this brought in like 10, 20, 30 million or a year or some crazy amount. So that was another example of the types of scams. And of course, there are still, I'm sure, connections to drug sales and prostitution. So, but as to how prevalent that is in the modern day, I am not sure. And as we said, there will be by the time of World War II, actually, the beginnings of the collaborations with intelligence agencies and different mobsters will emerge in World War II. This was an important area that I did not know about, and it's in fact multiple bosses, multiple pretty well-known gangsters directly worked with the U.S. military, the U.S. Army intelligence, naval intelligence, and even some of that, the extent is unclear. So don't know all of that. And then, of course, the unions. Remember that unions will play a huge role. We're still just giving kind of the overview of what we're looking at here. Because unions were important for controlling businesses. Right? If you could control a union, you could control a whole business, and you could keep up with the entire logistics of what things were being shipped and stored where, right? Because having that kind of intelligence is very important if you're running some kind of racket. Right? I need to know where these trucks go every day so that I can know, when and where to make all these drop-offs through some cover, right? Obviously that, and then beyond that also, I can have a lot of influence and control in businesses if I control a union. So the unions would eventually be more or less taken over by many mafia interests. This is back in like 40s, 50s, 60s. And if you've seen Casino, then you know that plays heavily into the very beginning of Martin Scorsese's Casino. And so I think that had different mobsters consulting on the film. So by the 1960s, the top 20 families, remember there's not just 5 families, there's the 5 main families, and then there's a lot of other connected individuals. By the 1960s, according to, I think, Rob, they had made the holdings of the families were around $7 billion. Now, $7 billion in 60s money is a lot of money, right? So this is no small chump change. But keep in mind, we are not positing here that the Sicilian Mafia runs the world. We are using this as a case study, as a test study to understand how the world really works. And so we can understand in this zoomed in analysis of how they obtain billions of dollars and how eventually we get, Las Vegas and all this kind of stuff. And then we can look at the global picture and see who the real global technocrat mobsters are, right? The real mobsters, right? The actual really bad guys. Okay, so that's what we're going to be looking at. And so again, if you try to come and correct me and tell me that the Sicilian Mafia doesn't run the world, I'm going to ban you because I already know that, and I've already dealt with that, and I've already said that probably 50 times. So don't correct me on that again. The what's interesting too is that the structure of the mafia is very, especially as we get into the 60s and 70s when these are billion-dollar, multi-billion-dollar operations, they're kind of corporate, very similar to a corporate structure. And the origins of the structure actually go back to Roman centurions, right? So the tradition of Roman, soldiers and their hierarchy is actually the basis for how the Sicilian Mafia structures their operations. And so what this does, there's a lot of positives for this, but one big positive that actually helped them to elude the investigation of U.S. Criminal operation, like investigators, be it the FBI or local police or whatever, is this sort of fencing off that the structure has for the boss. So in other words, it protects the operation, which is decentralized, from being busted because it's more like a network, a decentralized network of nodes, and you don't know who the boss is, right? Or the soldiers don't have access to the boss per se. And so that way, it doesn't look like it's a connected thing. It looks like it's just local criminals. And in fact, for many, many years, even after it was well known that there was organized crime, and remember the famous testimony of J. Edgar Hoover saying that there was no such thing as Cosa Nostra, that it wasn't an international thing. It was just merely local criminals. Now, I think what is probably the case, if you watch that, forget the name of it, there's a documentary on JFK and Hoover and JFK's assassination. Most likely, Hoover was blackmailed. So it's very likely that Hoover absolutely knew that there was, international crime racket. And in fact, there had already been investigations into like these rackets. So it was just ludicrous and preposterous for Hoover to say that there was no such thing as Cosa Nostra, but perhaps he was blackmailed, and that's what he was forced to say. As if you've seen, of course, JFK, the Oliver Stone film, then you know why Hoover was blackmailed. That's pretty well known. So if you would, of course, hit like and share as we delve into the deep dive of the five families. So let's get into the history. Oh, by the way, I did want to recount. So Selwyn Robb begins his book, interestingly, with kind of some interviews with present-day guys that had been arrested and kind of caught being hitmen, this kind of stuff. And there's a guy he calls Asaturo. And that was an interesting introduction to the book because it's modern day and it outlines the initiation ritual. And we want to make note of this because it's not just let's have a decentralized, private kind of corporate secret family structure. It's also a secret society. If you did not know this, yes, the Mafia has a initiatory quasi-Masonic secret society component to it. And this is very well known. So I remember reading about this many years ago, and I could not find where I was reading this, but this was a rumor for years until somebody's testimony. I don't remember who. Some FBI guy got busted, and then he spilled the beans to the FBI. I don't remember who it was, but he said, yes, we have a initiation where we take the omerta, the oath, and you have to, burn the card of the saint, and you have to, prick your finger. So it's basically a quasi-Masonic oath, and you die if you get killed if you break the oath. And then you're, of course, a made man and so forth. Can't be touched, supposedly. So where might that come about? Well, we will look here in a moment into the history of mafiosi back to the Middle Ages. But it is important to note that there is that revolutionary component, and that will factor into Garibaldi. So if you know of the figure in Italian history of Garibaldi, many of the mafiosi at that time were the soldiers for Garibaldi. So that could be where you get this sort of, I'm just speculating, I don't know, but the quasi-Masonic ritual elements, because as we know, Freemasonry has been involved in a lot of plots and operations in Italy. Italian revolutions were also Masonic, as you could imagine. But again, I don't know this area of history. So Rob has, I think, 2 chapters on the origins of medieval mafiosi. But before we get to that Masonic stuff, let's go back even further. So originally, the mafiosi were libertarian patriots. So if we go back to the Middle Ages, there were folk hero crusaders known as the mafiosa. And these were just guys who would protect their lands, protect the Sicilian people from the roving bands of marauders. And the history of Sicily is a place which has been over and over and over under all of these different powers. And so we can begin to see why they weren't enjoying that. Like, I don't want to just be the bitch of a bunch of different empires and outside forces, right? So, hey, let's all as clans and family members band together to protect each other against these bands of marauders. We're getting our women are being raped and stolen by all these foreign thugs. So we got to protect ourselves. So it makes sense, right? You can see the logic. Nothing inherently criminal or suspect in this medieval period. Now, as we get up into the modern period, we're going to fast forward here, but as I said, so Garibaldi would, when he was doing his unification project, he would hire a lot of these sort of country farming people who were also kind of bands of mercenaries and then sometimes thieves. And so they became Garibaldi's heroes, as he called them, because they helped him win the war. So he had an unlikely victory, and this allowed some of these families to come to prominence in Sicily. And here's an interesting fact that Selwyn notes, that the church was more than happy to support the self-defense work of the clans and the mafiosi. Okay, this is up into the 1800s, late 1800s now. So they were helping to fend off the church, right, from the roving bands of outsiders. And yes, some of these people were brigands and thieves, but they were more or less hired security, you could say. So again, it's not black and white. We're not talking about everybody fighting on the side of defense of Sicily or defense of the church out of noble motives. A lot of these people are degenerates, but you can see the logic of it, right? So again, it's not, you can't paint this all as either everybody's good or everybody's bad. There's a lot of mixed motivations here, and that's just a fact of history, right? So remember, when we're doing big geopolitical scale analysis, in historical analysis, we're not always going to be able to find clear black and white pictures of good guys and bad guys. It just doesn't work that way in history. So this is up into the late 1800s period is when we get the oaths. This is when they start to make the omerta. This is a decision is made that since we're going to have people basically running stuff in different regions, different clan heads and chiefs, right? This is where we get the idea of the boss, the chief, right? So the Don is going to be basically the self-defense, the local militia guy, you could say, for some area, some region. This is okayed by the church, and eventually the central government in Rome, the nascent constitutional monarchy in the late 1800s-ish, after Garibaldi, right? They say, okay, we're fine with that. You guys can do that. You do your thing, and we'll be all right with that. Now the point, what's interesting about the blood oath is that the blood oath is pretty close to Masonic oaths, right? So again, I don't have the proof of this, but it's pretty obvious that there is this direct kind of connection here of, if I violate the secret society, right, I vow to have my throat slit or whatever, this kind of stuff. And also, the other interesting fact that came out is that the way that it's often spoken of is like a church. It's like a religion. I'm not saying that it is literally a religion. I'm saying that the attitude, and you get this actually in a lot of the movies, the attitude of the people brought in is to treat the Don as if he were God the Father, right? So if you think about the way, we're supposed to kind of have an attitude towards the bishop, and a lot of the accounts of people being brought in and a lot of the oaths, right? You're submitting to the Don, the boss, the chief, the head of the clan, right, like a kind of autocrat. And this, again, I think harkens back to that Roman centurion, a Roman soldier structure, right? And hence the need for the initiation ritual and the blood oath. Now, why it's the burning of the saint, I'm not sure. I mean, obviously the story is that you hold the card and you burn the holy card, and that you say, if I violate whatever, then I vow to be, burned in hell forever, blah, blah, blah. Now, the advantages of joining eventually become, things like, well, your family, you have a network now, right? The family's going to take care of you, supposedly. If you die, your wife will be taken care of, right? So these were the promises, and you can see how it would develop out of this idea of, okay, we're going to be a local militia for protecting you against the, invading marauders. And then over time, it starts to be a thing where, you can't pay me with this. Okay, I'm going to take 10% of your olive oil business. I don't know. What does anybody in Italy do? I don't know. Olive oil business. I'm going to squeeze you for 10% of your oil. I'm going to squeeze the oil out of you. And then, so you can see the logic of how that would turn into the local Don, right? If you remember in The Godfather, I think it's Godfather 2, right? Where it flashes back to him being in Sicily, and it's Don whoever, I forget who, right? And then he doesn't like this guy, right? And but he wants to be the Don, right? It's flashing back to Don Corleone as a young boy, right? And then, of course, when he comes to the U.S. in Godfather 2, the Robert De Niro character, right, the young Don, he has to kill Don Cheech, right? And Don Cheech is just this local kind of thug that wears the white suit and has the big mustache, which I think probably echoes the Mustache Pete's. So if you don't know, prior to the Sicilian Mafia sort of coming to power, the five families, there were local gangs, one of which was known as the Mustache Pete's. And you can guess what the Mustache Pete's wore. It was a goatee. No, I'm joking. It was a mustache, yes. So to be a Mustache Pete, you wore a mustache, and you were just kind of a local thug. And it will fall, I think, upon, going from memory here, but I think Lucky Luciano will be the one who says, hey, these Mustache Pete's are a bunch of retards. We could move this into something much bigger. Either him or Tommy Lucchese, right? These guys are clowns. Let's turn this operation into something big. And so the Mustache Pete's will get pushed out. It's just a funny thing, the Mustache Pete's. I mean, you just picture like a villain with like a handlebar mustache, right? Anyway. So, let's see. Let's get down here to where we at in the notes. It's black. Another local gang, which is not the Mafia, like the Mustache Pete's, were the Black Hand. And the Black Hand were just kind of local thugs, local gangs. But neither the Mustache Pete's nor the Black Hand are the Mafia proper. I got so many notes here. I got to figure out where I'm at. Let's see. So let's get to... So the way this is going to go is kind of a background, and then it'll move to different important events and different important characters. So kind of each chapter will focus on like a different guy, a different family, different event. Now, part of the reason for the U.S. being a center, obviously, the common sense stuff of people moving here to want to make good money, to prosper, and so forth, due to poverty in their own lands. Obviously, that's been the case for 100 years. People want to move to the U.S. because of the open market, right? Because of the so-called free market. But now, when Mussolini rises to power, this becomes a tough time for the Sicilian Mafia because Mussolini goes after the Mafia. So Mussolini is not a big fan of these people, and he kind of butts heads off and on with them. He'll try to cultivate relationship with Vito Genovese, and also at the same time have falling outs, and then try to go after the mafia, and then this sends some of them to the U.S. Right? So there's a love-hate, difficult relationship between Mussolini and the mafia. So the early American mobsters, one of the key figures early on, will of course be Joe Bonanno. Joe Bonanno will be one of the important 5 families, the Bonanno family. And he comes from Sicily. And one of the things that he realizes, along with Lucky and some others, is that the prohibition is a godsend, right? The banning on liquor is the greatest thing ever because, of course, they're coming from Italy. Everybody in Italy drinks wine, right? That's a big export, right? Olive oil and wine. Well, here, all the goofball Protestants and evangelical clowns had instituted teetotaling prohibition. And what does teetotaling prohibition do? Well, it allows for the bootleggers to make bank, to stack fat cash, right? To stack cheese, baby. And the mobsters just think that this is hilarious, right? This is so preposterous that the teetotalers have enough. And by the way, I have not exactly figured out what the relationship is between why the Rockefellers supported the teetotaling and the Rockefellers will go after the mafia. This will be important in terms of Hot Springs. If you don't know, Rockefellers come out of Hot Springs, or excuse me, out of Arkansas. And so Governor Winthrop Rockefeller, who, right, will be the governor of Arkansas, he will make also moves against the mafia. I'm currently reading a chapter about that, so I don't have all the details yet on as to why exactly there's probably just trying to take over their racket, right? I do not believe that the Rockefellers or Winthrop, whatever his name is, Rockefeller had these puritanical motives of really trying to help people not drink alcohol. Give me a break. It had to do with probably controlling these different rackets, controlling the alcohol, right? This is a huge billion-dollar business, about to be booming billion-dollar business, right? And so most of the mobsters in this early phase, when they move here, they will decide, I think it's either Lucky Luciano or Tommy Lucchese says, these mustache Pete's are idiots because they don't see that the bootlegging racket doesn't have to be this small-time thing out of a garage. We can turn this into a big racket to sell liquor everywhere, right? Because everybody wants to drink. And by the way, everybody was drinking. Like everybody would go to the speakeasies, right, which was these hidden places. And by the way, all the cops and the judges and the politicians also went to the speakeasies. So it was just a big scam, right, where they still drank and everybody kind of publicly, right, oh, alcohol's illegal. But not all the teetotaler idiots were running around pretending and acting like they were, holy rollers and were working for Jesus by shutting down the drinkers. Meanwhile, everybody's just drinking at night at the speakeasy. And everybody knew this was going on, right? That's the funny thing. And so really the busting people for bootlegging and running liquor, that was more of a way to just go after somebody that you didn't like, you see. So it wasn't really about busting liquor, unless you were just some like teetotaler, naive do-gooder, right? Goody-goody. Which there were some of those, but I mean, really you have to be pretty naive, right? Not to understand that this is all really about money. Ergo, prohibition is a big aid to the black market. If it's not prohibited, then it's out there on the open market. And if it's on the open market, this drives the prices down. See? And yes, I'm aware that this is an argument that libertarians make all the time. I'm not trying to say that, therefore I agree with everything libertarians say. I'm just saying this is true. Okay, so this is a factual point that we should admit that, yes, if the things are illegal. Now, I'm not saying that means we need to make everything that's criminal prosecution, criminally illegal, legal, or decriminalized per se, because it's more complex than that. And even when we get to, THC, hemp, and marijuana, it gets very complex, right? So that's not what we're doing here, is to try to figure out all the libertarian social issues. I'm just making the point that you can see from the vantage point of just the pragmatic approach to making bank. Yes, we want the alcohol to remain banned. And this is where we get Al Capone. I can't read my note here. Myron. Okay, so basically at this early stage, you've got Massaria, Maranzano, and Lucky Luciano take over bootlegging. Al Capone gets in on this, as well as Joseph Kennedy Sr. So this is this early 20s phase, right, of these families figuring out that we can all get in on making bank on prohibited alcohol prohibition. So Al Capone gets in on this. He joins up and he says, "Hey, we all need to let's have a meeting, right?" And so there's a big meeting, and Lucky comes up with this idea. Lucky Luciano. He says, "We need to have a structure, and we need to have families." And this, I think, is the Chicago meeting of 1920. Yes, this is it. So they all go, and they're going to sit down with Al, Big Al Capone, and Lucky, and the other two guys. And they say, all right, let's use the model of the Roman legion and the under Caesar. And what we'll have is a boss, an underboss, the capo, and the soldiers. And then, of course, that's the whole oath of the omerta comes in, and then they note that the soldiers won't be able to divulge the details on the boss. So that decentralized, compartmentalized structure is what allows this to function. So Lucky Luciano and Joe Bonanno, also key figures here, they ally, and they go and talk to Meyer Lansky. Right. So now Meyer is not a huge figure. Meyer is a crafty businessman and finance wizard. Meyer Lansky was a very intelligent guy. And so he says, I can consult you and I can help you also figure out the way America works, and I can tell you the best way to set this stuff up. So a confluence of interest here. And by the way, it's not Meyer Lansky that's running this. It's Meyer that is consulting and helping the Lucky, Al, Tommy Lucchese, who else was it? Massaria and Maranzano. And they decide to set up the structure. Al Capone agrees. And now there's going to be a linked network, right? Because all the mobsters went to Chicago in 1920 and met with Al to help settle this up. Now, Al's not running this, okay? And in fact, as time goes on, Capone will kind of be a smaller, less powerful player in this, although he will get a lot of media attention. So Al Capone becomes the first kind of big media sensation, and he's a lot more prominent in the media than he is in the actual mafia. However, he does have connections and he does have a role. So one of the things that they decide here was to add the office of the consigliere. Okay, the consigliere is the consultant, right? He's the guy who consults, or he runs things, perhaps as the underboss of the number two, if things are shut down or if the boss gets arrested, right? And the omerta, of course, is stressed here at the 1920 meeting to keep things secret. And this functions kind of like a 10 Commandments of the code, right? The mafiosa code. Other elements of the commandments were that you had to be of Sicilian heritage by both parents. So bloodlines become very key in this setup. Now, why would that be? Well, what are some of the most powerful ties that bind us as humans? Kinfolk, duh. right? So, as with all structures of the elites in history, bloodlines play a key role. And another idea that was settled on here was the idea of a fixed number of members. Okay, so you're not going to have like 100 people, 200 people in the family, and then, I met some guys, and let's bring them in, and let's expand to so they weren't so concerned about numbers, like expansion, as they were keeping it fixed and keeping it secret. And only by death could we have somebody brought in, right? And then, they would pick people, and this is where you get, kind of the being sent for stuff in the movies where, you're being sent for. And then you got to put your suit on, and you got to go. Remember in Sopranos, right, when Christopher gets sent for, and then he's, he finally gets made and takes his oath. Let's see. Now, recruitment occurs by other higher-ups, right? So you might get, so-and-so, he's been with the family for 20 years, right? He's a good guy, right? And, but just because you were a good earner, that didn't necessarily mean you were going to move up. And they would only select those that they thought were the best, right? The smartest, the most ruthless, perhaps, the best earners. All of that would go into it. And the other thing was that this was a lifetime commitment. Right? This is not a thing where I'll work for you guys for 5 years, and then I'll go do my own thing. No, you take a blood oath that's a lifetime commitment. There is no leaving. So again, much like being owned by the military, or much like being brought into the intelligence apparatus, right? You don't really get to leave when you make commitments to these entities. Now, I'm sure there are some exceptions that some people do leave. Some people do, I don't know, go into witness protection or something. I don't know. But at least in terms of the oath, the idea is that you can't leave. So, the organizational structure here is supreme over the individual as a collective. In other words, you are submitted to the organization. Okay, this is not a libertarian thing for the lower rung guys. As you move up, yes, you might get more authority, more power, but you also get more responsibility, and more money goes up the chain. You're responsible for bringing in more money, right? So, not always made in the shade type of thing, right? Now, Lucky comes up with this other idea, which is that we need a commission, right? There needs to be a commission for the nationwide families to settle disputes, and he comes up with a jurisdictional model. Again, very like a synod, like a synod of the ecumenical council of the Mafia. And then so you have to make decisions by the bosses of the five families, right? So the five families have bosses, and they kind of run things like a pentarchy, I guess, in a way. And if there's disputes, you're supposed to come to the bosses to settle the dispute. And this would prevent, right, factional fighting, supposedly, hopefully, and then allow the families to prosper. If you're a boss, you can't be prosecuted. Right? Bosses are immune. Bosses can't be whacked. Bosses cannot be gone after. The boss's word is authoritative. However, this rule will not always be followed, because as we will see, some of the bosses will get whacked. Right? I mean, we're in the realm of criminals, right? I mean, what makes you think that a criminal is going to keep his word? Right? Now, many times they do, but many times they don't. So some of the bosses will get whacked at the decision of the other bosses. Now, early on in this bootlegging 20s phase, the idea was to focus on alcohol, right? And of course, we know with Capone and some of the other guys, they had expanded into other rackets like prostitution, and they will also expand into very soon the garment markets. I didn't even know there was a garment racket, but there will be a big garment racket in the 30s. But as I mentioned earlier, there are, at this phase, the key legal things that they wanted to avoid weren't so much local cops or getting busted for bootlegging. What they wanted to avoid was taxes, right? Those big fat IRS things that come in. The mobsters were chiefly interested in avoiding taxation. So in Chicago, they would be known as the Outfit. New York, families would be known as the Cosa Nostra. The Buffalo area would be known as the Arm, and New England would be known as the Office. A made man, a capo, all right, would be one who was. You also can't just kill a capo. Right? If you kill a made man, you are in trouble. You're not supposed to kill a made man. So soldiers, unfortunately, you can be killed. Made man, if you kill a made man, you're in trouble. Right. So this would instill fear. Obviously, fear plays a big role in the power structure here. And so to be connected, right, is to be a made man. Right. So don't touch anybody connected. You better watch out if you do. Right. And it became a dictum here, going back to Sicily. Right. It's much. I'm trying to remember the exact phrase of the dictum. Better to. It's the politician and the law enforcement is more to be feared. No, wait. The mafia is more to be feared than the law. That's what it was. So the dictum was that the gangster was more to be feared than getting busted by Officer O'Malley. Officer O'Malley's just going to throw you into the paddy wagon, right? But Lucky's going to put a bullet in you. So, key point at this stage, 20s, bootlegging, but money, racket, right? Bootlegging. In 1925, bootlegging had made the families $12 million. And, no, 12 million had come in and 4 million cleared. So I guess that they had to pay costs. So they pocketed 4 million, which in the 20s is a lot of money. And keep in mind too that we are about to hit the period of Prohibition. The end of Prohibition and the Depression. And do you think that the families will do well or do bad in the Depression? Well, I can tell you that Joseph Kennedy Sr. did very well during the Depression, right? So, turns out they do fabulously during the Depression. But bad news, all right, because they got to figure out something else because Prohibition is about to end. So now this cash cow Prohibition, and many of the mobsters, Lucky and others, had seen where the winds were blowing. So they knew that this cash cow was going to fade away. So they had to come up with and figure out the next racket to get into. And I don't exactly understand how this works, but it's the garment racket. So they had learned through certain sectors of the Jewish mafia that there's money to be made in this garment racket, which is the Clothing Workers Union. And so this begins the phase of infiltrating and controlling the unions. So Lucky and Lucchese move in and eventually take over the garment racket and union. So this begins a phase where Joe Bonanno doesn't just do black market stuff. He starts moving into legitimate businesses and fronts through controlling these unions and taking over businesses, you see. So this is a key move here to have legitimate operations and the criminal operations. Now I've got so many notes here. I got to figure out where I'm at. Okay, here we go. Prohibition. Yeah. Okay, so now this gets a little. Again, the racket of garments is confusing to me. I don't understand how this works, but I think it's just basically about taking over the unions. So in 1931, Lucky and Tommy Lucchese decide to build a business model after they took out, as I said, the Mustache Petes, right? So the Mustache Petes are gone. They were too small time. Lucky and Tommy Lucchese build a... we got the boss structure. We got all that. Okay, so Prohibition. Here we go. Prohibition comes in 1933. Time to figure out a better way to make money. And so not just the garment racket, but there's also this other racket that they figure out called the kosher chicken racket. So the Jews had tipped off the Italians that you could make money on kosher chicken because all the Jews who were Orthodox had to buy chicken from basically one rabbi who would bless the chickens or whatever. And so eventually, Tommy Lucchese, being the ruthless mobster that is, he controls this whole thing. So eventually, Tommy Lucchese gets control of the entire kosher chicken market. Here's a Jewish guy controlling the entire kosher chicken racket. And then he would rig the market somehow, right? He could charge exorbitant prices, and it wasn't the other mobsters. He would pass the cost on to the consumer. So basically, everybody was benefiting in terms of the business owners, the rabbis, and the mobsters, because it was just the public that was paying these extra taxes and fees. This is known as the first big mafia tax, right? The kosher chicken tax. And then Lucchese decides, hey, if we can control this market and levy these new taxes, why don't we move into others? And this is how they got, by the way, to the garment district and the clothing union racket. And this was because Manhattan ships 1/3 of all fashions to the rest of the world. So in the 1930s, Manhattan is literally 1/3 of the world's fashion, right? And so he moves into after getting a large chunk of the fashion racket, he moves into loan sharking, right? And so, as you can imagine, after the Depression, a lot of people broke, right? The payday loan, baby. Baby, come down to the payday loan, right? Remember my payday loan song? They were doing that. They were doing the payday loan thing, right? We'll give you $500 now. You pay back $600,000 in 2 weeks, right? So that's like the worst scam of all, right? Anyway, they figure, move into the loan sharking, and especially after the Depression, everybody's hurting, and this becomes a great way to get businesses. So find business owners that are going into debt, that are in trouble. You loan them money. They can't pay back. I got a little plan for you. You're going to let me have a little bit of your business. Right? So then you start getting people's businesses. Right? And then eventually, through this payday loan racket and buying out businesses, Tommy Lucchese was bringing in $5 million a year during the Depression. So he was making bank when everybody else was making broke, baby. This also leads to the idea, because the Sicilian mobsters loved boxing, why don't we start rigging the boxing matches? Right? You can see the logic here. And so they begin stepping. And we'll have more on this later when we get to, I think, Rocky Marciano, right, was one of the first guys that they would say, oh, you're going to, maybe you take a fall in the third round. Maybe if you don't, you get a broken leg, right? So, and you can see the logic of this. Why bet $5,000 on Rocky Marciano losing unless I can ensure that Rocky Marciano loses, right? Or something like, I don't know if that's the case. I'm just giving an example. And so then they say, hey, there's other unions. Let's go buy and control the truckers union. So then they go and buy up the truckers union. Next, Tommy Lucchese says, hey, I can do more than this. I can buy off these idiot politicians. And of course he does. He goes and he starts buying off politicians. And so if you're under worry or threat of being busted, well, you just buy off the politician, right? And he was able to do all this, we're speaking here of Tommy and Lucky,
because Tommy Lucchese stayed low profile. And any time that he got wind of the cops beginning to sniff out his operations, why, he would just go pay off the cops. And this was a lot easier than you think, because how much do you think Officer O'Malley makes, right? Not much. And so if Officer O'Malley makes 25 cents a week and Tommy Lucchese comes along and says, maybe I'll give you $50 a week, right? Easy. No problem. So you can begin to see again there the logic of what's going on and why it's going on this way. All right, where are we at? Gambino's, Tammany Hall. Let's see, how long have we been going here? Hour 16. We got a good bit of information on Gambino's as a family, Murder Inc., Vegas, Momo, aka Sam Giancana, Joe Bonanno, Albert Anastasia, who is Murder Inc., then the Florida Connection, Santo Trafficante, and then we get into, of course, the very important JFK sections. And then, of course, we also got to do Vito, right? Vito Genovese. So I think maybe we will pause here. We've been going for over an hour, and we've done a good introductory lecture here. So as I said, the next section we'll do there's a lot in, again, this is an 800-page book. So I don't know how many lectures this is going to be, where there'll be other books too. So this could be a series of, who knows, right? It might be 8, maybe like Tragedy and Hope, 8 talks. I don't know. But immediately after, well, not immediately after this, but in about an hour and a half, we get another show tonight, live stream. The longtime researchers and guys that, if you remember, many, many years ago, I interviewed them on the alien deception. Some of the first Jay's Analysis interviews many, many years ago, 7-8 years ago, were with the Collins brothers, and we analyzed the alien psyop. And of course, they have collected together 7 years of research. Gigantor book here, okay. I have not read this entire book. We've done about, 100 pages, but I just got it the other day, right? So they just sent me their copy maybe a week or two ago. So we're going to get into everything relating to, so the book is called Invoking the Beyond, the Kantian Rift, Mythologized Menaces, and the Quest for the New Man. So basically it's all about Darwin, panspermia, the Lodge, the philosophy of naturalism, atheism, Comte, socialism, technocracy, the occult, and again, what's coming to fruition now with the big alien deception psyop. So we will be interviewing the Collins brothers in an hour and a half at 8 p.m. Central Time. That should be a good conversation. So look forward to that. And let me tell you, like, I've gotten 50, 100 pages into the book. Actually skipped to the middle to do the alien section. So they're bringing out all kinds of stuff I didn't know about the alien psyop. So, but that's to be expected. I mean, they spent 7 years writing this book. Anyway, so in the next section, we're going to get to the figure of Momo. He will play importantly in this. We're going to do Murder Inc. If you don't know what that is, right? Very important. I don't know how much is going to be in the part 2, but it will be in the part 2. So look for that. Hope you enjoyed our introduction to the 5 families. And I'm doing your homework for you. Hey, I'm doing your homework for you, baby. What do you think? What do you think? Let's do these super chats. Let's go back to Buck Spencer. He says, that mind gangster shh. That's right, Buck. That mind gangster shh. Mick Ale for $10. Jay, check out your Instagram. I created an epic boomer wave featuring a little AIDS graphic that I think you'll appreciate. Cool. I will check that out. And
if it is Little AIDS approved, I will share it. So I have to go look at it first. I guess you tag me in it. I don't know. There's probably 5 million things on my Instagram because I'm probably the best rapper alive, but maybe not. Maybe number 2 at least. So I get so many messages that I may not even see the messages from the little people like yourself. So, but I do appreciate the little people. I just want you to know that. John Connor, $5. I grew up in the neighborhood of Al Capone's getaway cabin in Minnesota. Interesting. The roads and the infrastructure in this town are very confusing. Built to outrun the police if you know the layout. That's funny. My friend found multiple weapons buried, and I was, wow, that's crazy. Multiple weapons buried on the property. You know, I was really hoping that Tom Hardy Al Capone movie would be good. It's not terrible. It's just a little too weird because it's told in this out of order phase of him, like him as he's going nuts from syphilis is kind of what I think the movie is trying to do. But also he just looks really weird as Al Capone. I don't know. And it's very hard to tell what he's saying. I'm speaking of Tom Hardy here. But maybe we'll get to it. I don't know. John Connor, again for $5. One of the strongest mafia is the U.S. military. Yeah, well, and they will actually work with the mafioso. Some of my SF, Special Forces, San Francisco, I guess salty French fries, sexy freaks, sordid fancies. I'm trying to think of anything that could be an SF. I don't know. But he explained it as a white boy gang for the government. Well, yeah, I mean, the CIA is a private army of the Rockefellers, you could say. So I'm not surprised that the special forces operate in some similar type of oath type thing, I'm guessing. Notice the most elite forces are white, bald, and reptilian-looking characters. I'm not sure what you mean by reptilian. Are the special forces white, bald? Oh, I guess. I mean, I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm just thinking about what does it mean to be reptilian. But yeah, I think a lot of these types of secret things, whether it's a secret society or a secret, the secret team that Colonel Fletcher Prouty wrote about, or special forces, or Navy SEALs, or the Mafia, right? I mean, they all kind of have that secret brotherhood blood oath structure because it's just from a practical standpoint, right? There's a lot of sense that you can see why they would structure it that way. Tall City. No, John, yeah. Tall City, $5. Forget about it. Forget about it. Right. And yes, I was just watching Donnie Brasco, right? And the Johnny Depp character. He does his whole little bit about forget about it. John Connor again for $5. There are still mafia in Minnesota. They protect Jesse Ventura's island near White Bear Lake. Jesse Ventura owns an island, you're saying? That's weird. Yeah, I mean, again, there are still the mafia. They haven't gone away, but it is disputed and debated as to what degree of power and influence the mafia has today, or have they been supplanted by a bigger mafia and a more dangerous, right, technocrat, deep state mafia. Let's see. John Connor, $5 again. When you go out in public, do you feel like everybody's a mentally tarted child? Because I do, and I know you know more than I do. I mean, kinda, but I think that part of that is just because we're in a situation where so many people are so dumbed down that it's like in Idiocracy, right? Remember the Luke Wilson character is just a normie. Like, he's just a normal dude, but in the future where everybody is like so low IQ, he's the genius, and he's just basically a regular dude with common sense. So I look at it like that, right? Like, maybe I'm more like a Luke Wilson, and the world has just been that dumbed down. Tall City again for $5. Ford's Model T engine was capable of running on petrol or alcohol. The Rockefellers didn't want to lose out on petrol sales. What are you going to do? Well, that's an interesting angle. In the Charles Ashman book that we'll be covering, there is a chapter on Rockefeller and his crackdown. So I'm guessing that the Rockefeller Commission is going to shed some light on why and what the relationship is between the Rockefellers and the Mafia. Mick Ale, $5. Fun fact, Fauci is an Italian surname. Sure. It is derived from the Sicilian word for sickle. Interesting. I don't know Dr. Fauci's background, so I don't have any idea if his family comes from any kind of connected thing, but nothing will surprise me. John Connor again for $5. I'm dropping Abrahams. I'm dropping Abrahams as in $5 bills because Lincoln was taken out by the Illuminate Confirm. I'm not sure about that. I'm aware of the Knights of the Golden Circle and the Lincoln John. I know about all that. I'm not sure about that. Maybe. But Lincoln was a weird guy too. He was involved in. He apparently had Rosicrucian interests, and he was involved in esoteric stuff. So I just don't know. I don't have any set, but I'm aware of these theories. So I'm not sure what I think about that. Maybe the Bush-Clinton bloodline can be. All right. Well, I'm not going to get in trouble by reading that, but thank you. Womp 396. I enjoyed your conversation with Dylan. Yes. Check out the new interview that we did on Neuro Poster. I was on his Sued Space podcast, and we had a good chat. It speaks to the force of orthodox arguments and your delivery of them that someone as well-read and brainy as Tom was convinced. Well, yeah, it's not just, of course, logic and argumentation. Of course, it's the Spirit of God who convinces people ultimately, but hopefully we can be the means by which, God convinces people. But thank you for that. Womp, and everybody be sure and check out the interview we did with Neuro Poster, as he goes by now. J Mel for $10. Could you speak to Whitey? Whitey was associated with... Yeah, well, again, so this is going to be a series, right? So we are still way back in the early phases. Okay, so Whitey will be down the road. And yes, we will cover Whitey. But mainly right now we're talking about the five families. Now, Whitey will play into that because he does relate to the Mafia, but the, Winter Hill Gang? They're not a major player, except that they were apparently used by the FBI. So, right, that's what comes up in most of the documentaries about Whitey Bulger, and that's what comes up in the... Black Mass with Johnny Depp, which I think is a pretty good movie. So, yeah, we'll get to all that. And by the way, Jamie and I are going to be doing some movie streams about the mob movies. Right? So that will tie into the series that I'm doing. So look for those. I think we're going to do... let me see. I got it listed here which ones we're going to do. We're going to do... No, I don't. I don't know. We're going to do some of the big Mafia movies pretty soon. We're not going to do The Godfather because I've already done like 2 or 3 analyses of The Godfather. So we're going to be doing the other ones like Casino and that kind of stuff. So look for that in the next week or so. And we're going to be doing several of those, right? So we'll do 5 big Mafia movies. Then we'll do, for subscribers, 5 lesser known good ones. Eastern Promises, for example. Really, really good. Imagine a Mafia movie with an FSB guy as a hero. That's That's an unexpected presentation from David Cronenberg. So if you've seen Eastern Promises, that was a great Mafia movie, which I didn't expect. But there you go. Randy Churchill, $20. Thank you always for your content. Big Dum Dum, $10. Thank you for reading the books I buy but never read and explaining the meaning in the books. Well, there you go. That's why I'm doing your homework for you. Right? So if you want to get access to part 2, when we dive into the really juicy, meaty stuff with, who is it? Gambino, Family, Murder, Inc. with Albert Anastasia, Carlo Gambino, The Rise of Vegas, and the beginning of the FBI to crack down. Right? We're going to talk about Joe Bonanno, Albert Anastasia, all of that. Santo Traficante in Florida. So hope you enjoy this. Again, in 1 hour, we'll be back with the Collins brothers to discuss the alien deception. So hope you enjoyed this. If you want to see part 2, you can subscribe below at the link at my website to Jay's Analysis. Become a member for $4.95 a month or $60 a year. And I wanted to mention too, unfortunately, I apologize. I know that some people, a couple people in the last couple months signed up for the tutoring. I just don't have time to do the one-on-one tutoring anymore. So we had a good run. We did tutoring for about 3 years to a lot of people. But we've grown to the point, which is good news. We've grown to the point now where we just can't, there's no way to have time to tutor one-on-one anymore. So I have to focus the attention on this kind of stuff because this reaches so many more people. So that's a good thing. It's actually a good thing to grow to that level. And for those of you that signed up for like yearly, or I forget the tiers I did. Now I'm just going to mail you both of the books and give you either a year or a lifetime membership. So if somebody signed up for the $300 tier, I forget what it was, something like that, I'll just give you a lifetime membership. I'm speaking on Patreon here, right? So Patreon's separate from, that's the advantages of if you use Patreon. I'll give you a lifetime membership and the two books and maybe Jamie's book. I forget what I put in there, but anyway, I'm sorry. There's just no feasible way to field there's like, I don't know, 100 messages a day from people, so I just don't have time to do all this. But thank you guys, and look for the Collins brothers in an hour. And then we're gonna have I hope that this becomes like the Tragedy and Hope Talk, right? Because the Tragedy and Hope Talk was very successful. That whole series, we got tremendous amount of traction over the last 3 or 4 years from that. Right? We're kind of known for that, right? We have a kind of a name. We're known for talking about that big fat book and lecturing through it because really no one else has done that yet. Again, plenty of people. I know that Joe guy wrote that book. I'm sure it's great, of Tragedy and Hope 101. But who has lectured through the entire book? Right? Well, not many people. Of course, again, not dissing Richard Grove. Richard has implemented a lot of great content through Tragedy and Hope and covering Tragedy and Hope at length. So not sliding Richard, not trying to diss Corbett. Those guys do great work too. But hopefully we can make this into a Tragedy and Hope tier talk and series. That's what I would hope to do at least. Darren McAdams donates another $22.22. Woo! Esoteric numbers there. Mr. Dyer, go buy something pretty, I insist. Capiche? Thanks, Jay. Peace. Well, with $22.22, what is a pretty thing that I could buy? I could buy another tracksuit. I'm gonna buy another tracksuit. I'm gonna go squat. I'm gonna go squat like a Slav, talking like I'm from the Bronx side of New York. Squatting Slav with an Italian accent makes no sense, but that's what it is, baby.